Hey everybody, this is John for MTG Nexus coming at you with a quick speculation video due to something people have discovered online. As a friendly reminder, if you do like these informative modern videos, please consider subscribing to the channel, giving us a thumbs up, leaving a constructive comment down below. So I'm not quite sure who did the deep diving to try to find this link, but there has been a banned and restricted list announcement coming out for October 10th, which would be tomorrow as we're recording this video. And no one seems to know what formats this ban and restricted announcement will affect. The last couple ones have kind of been out of nowhere, as far as there was a ban in like Pauper or something, and then there was some changes to some alchemy and such. But this one feels like it's going to impact one of the three, what you would call really the pillars of Magic at this point, that being standard, pioneer, or modern. Most people have been reading comments on Reddit and stuff. People have been thinking that maybe standard will get hit, but there has been some speculation about modern and what cards might be banned or possibly unbanned in the format. So I figured we'd do a quick video on that and kind of look at what cards would most likely be on the chopping block at this point. Obviously, the printing of Leyline Binding has kind of shook up the modern format. Murktide's kind of been knocked from its perch a little bit and is no longer the premier deck in the format. Instead, a lot of these 4 and 5 color mana based decks, whether it be 4 color Omnath piles, 4 color elementals, whether it be things like these Scapeshift, Bring to Light Scapeshift piles, etc., have all kind of pushed themselves to the forefront of the format for now, as people are kind of trying those decks out instead of just falling back on the old reliable Is It Murktide list. So let's take a look at some cards that might see bannings and some cards that might potentially be unbanned tomorrow. So the first card, and I'm going to state this right off the bat, I don't believe there will be a banning in Modern tomorrow. I do think the format is in an okay, if a little bit stale shape. Leyline Binding has kind of shook up the format a little bit. But I think the first card that would be for consideration on the chopping block would be Wrenn 6. If you look at the format like Pioneer, where fetch lands are banned, the mana bases are a little bit harder to manage. While there are 5 color decks like 5 color Niv, 5 color Enigmatic Fires, or 3 and 4 colors Fire Invention decks, those land bases are possible, especially with the Triomes and the Shock lands and all the different things going on. But they're a lot harder to achieve than they are with the fetch land mana base. So if you're not going to overtly ban fetch lands in a format like Modern, which it seems highly unlikely that they would this late into a format's development, one of the cards you can consider is Wrenn 6. Now, as far as reasons why Wrenn 6 could potentially be a card getting banned, first off, it's been around since Modern Horizons 1, so it's got a little less freshness on it than things like the Elemental Incarnations, or things like Raghavan and such. Cards that have been around a little bit less longer. This card has certainly proven its pedigree in terms of being problematic for a lot of formats that's been in. It's been banned already in Legacy because of its interaction with specifically Wasteland, and maybe Wizards has decided that these 4 and 5 color mana bases have just become too out of hand, and maybe it's time to take a dent into them. The other card that you could potentially consider in those decks is Omnath, but I don't really think Omnath is particularly the problem. And Wrenn just really helps these 5 color land bases to really kind of function and to make them, realistically a possibility. So, and it also comes down and sometimes deals with a lot of turn 1 creatures from opposing decks. Things like Raghavan, Dragon Rage's Channel, or any type of Mana Dork decks. If there's one deck that is precipitously fallen off, it has been the various different tribal decks, merfolk, elves, humans, etc. Really, any type of creature deck you see these kind of days are more akin to a deck like Golgari Yawgmoth or Hammer Time, or a deck like Burn, where it really doesn't care about something like Wrenn 6, or their creatures are a little bit more resilient and they don't care about this card. And that said, its ultimate can be game winning, especially if you have something like Lightning Bolt in your graveyard, or just some type of overwhelming card advantage like Expressive Iteration. Constantly pitching lands to get those back can be problematic. This would be certainly a card that would take a knock out of the sales of those 5 color decks if Wizards did deem that it was a problem. Another card to consider would be Raghavan. While this card is nowhere near the high that it once was in terms of the format, it is a deck that has already been banned in Legacy, just like Wrenn 6. It is a card that can run away with a game on its own, just from stealing cards off top of your opponent's deck, giving you a mana advantage. And there's a number of decks that see play with this deck. Most of them happen to be Blood Moon decks. So you see things like Is It Murktide, Rakdos Scam, some of the variants of Mono Red Prison that have come out to play, really with the advantage of Blood Moon being in a 4 and 5 mana color format. So this is a card whose power level certainly warrants consideration at some point, potentially being banned. And as we said, it's already kind of been banned in the Legacy format. It is certainly a card that is difficult to replace. Unlike Dragon Rage's Channeler or Ledger Shredder, there is no immediate replacement for Raghavan. What it does, obviously there are other options, things like Delver of Secrets and stuff. So Murktide wouldn't terribly fall off, but it would not be the powerful force that it is now. That said, Murktide is a little bit on the downswing, so I would be kind of surprised to see Raghavan get answered. And unlike Legacy, there's a lot more creature answers running around. Legacy has a lot more spell combo-based decks than Modern does, so it is certainly a format where you see more Fatal Pushes, you see more Unholy Heats, you see more Lightning Bolts than you do in a format like Legacy. So I don't think this card is as prevalent necessarily to get kicked off the list, but it is certainly a card you can consider if you want to knock down Murktide in addition to the 5-color piles. Alright, another card people have talked about potentially at different points needing a banning is Omnath itself. So Omnath, while it is a 4-mana card, and often 4-mana cards just generally don't get banned because, well, it's kind of hard to hit turn 4 in a format like Modern sometimes. This is a card that does a lot of different things that makes the 4-color decks really, really good. It's been part of the 4-color soup pile since Uro and Field of the Dead were in the format. Obviously those cards got banned, but it does bridge the gap. First off is a life gain machine against aggressive decks, making their job that much harder, so it makes it harder for decks like Burn or Humans or Merfolk to kind of close out the game once one of these enters play. 4/4 is a decent sized blocker, can be difficult to remove sometimes, especially for a deck relying on burn spells, or having to turn on Revolt for something like Fatal Push. And then, with Fetch Lands, this card can get quite out of hand. Oftentimes there's a sequence on turn 5, especially in these Yurion piles, that you'll see a turn 4 or play an Omnath, play a fetch land, crack the fetch land, and cast a Yurion. So you get this value where you get to go draw a card, gain 4 life, lose a life to play another land, gain 5 mana, play this other 4/5 flyer that blinks your Omnath, drawing you another card. And really that's kind of the crux of these 4 and 5 color piles, is just this enormous pile of value. And oftentimes, Omnath allows them to get to that late game portion where they just take over with all this card draw. And certainly a card worth looking at. That said, its color restrictions are a little bit restrictive, obviously, especially if you were to knock out something like Wrenn and 6, this card would be a little bit worse. And if you look at a format like Pioneer, while it is a solid role player in some decks, it really doesn't see a lot of play outside of something like a 5-color Bring to Light Niv, or something like the Omnath Fires decks, or the 4-color Fires deck. Sometimes they'll see play in that, or sometimes they'll see play in this Elementals-esque deck that has this great game against Rakdos mid-range in that format, but really struggles against a lot of the aggressive decks and other go-over-the-top strategies. So this is another card that could potentially consider being banned in the format. Another card people can consider for bannings is Yurion Sky Nomad. Now, what's ironic is this card is basically only good in the mirror matches, and often dilutes the strategies overall that a lot of them are playing. Now, obviously, something like 80 card Rhinos decks gain a little bit of consistency by adding 4 more Cascade spells to their extra 20 cards. But a lot of other decks find it a little bit more difficult to find their Yurions in different things. And Yurion has always been part of the argument, along with Luris before Luris got banned, that these two cards were just too powerful and too overpowered for what their restrictions were to deck building. Adding 20 cards to your deck turns out isn't really that big of a cost for this card that is basically a free 4/5 flyer, or at least free in terms of an extra card in the mid to late game, card that you can pitch to something like Solitude or Subtlety, while also being this card that allows you to get an enormous amount of value off of your different things to blink, whether it be Omnaths or blinking your Planeswalkers or blinking other different ETB effects you might have. The deck building restrictions on this really aren't that high, especially in a format with fetch lands and such. This is another card that people have considered for banning, although it really only improves ironically, the 80 card Yurion mirrors. You lose a little bit of consistency and, for a little bit of power, but, it is a card that people have talked about. I wouldn't see Yurion getting banned quite at this point, as the Yurion decks didn't take over as a lot of people thought they would, me included, after Luris got banned, but, it is a card to consider that might be banned tomorrow. The final card I could see on the chopping block for banning tomorrow would be Expressive Iteration. Now, Expressive Iteration is banned in Pioneer for being a little bit too powerful, making the Izzet decks there a little bit more ridiculous, but I think that was more a function of the fact that the Izzet decks have access to the powerful delve spells like Treasure Cruise and Temporal Trespass, whereas in the modern format, all those cards are banned. Dig Through Time is banned, Treasure Cruise is banned, things like Ponder and Preordain are banned. So, there's a little bit less power in a format as far as the cantrips themselves, as opposed to things like Legacy, where you still have Ponder and Brainstorm, and a lot of people have talked about this card getting knocked off in there because of the power of the Delver decks, even despite Raghavan getting banned in that format. That said, Expressive Iteration is a card that you see mostly in Izzet Murktide and the 4-color Omnath piles. It's a little bit less seen in some of the decks like obviously you don't see it in Rhinos, you don't see it in Living End, you don't even really see it in the Creativity piles as much. But, this is a card that is another thing you could potentially, use to knock down what most people would consider the top 2 decks in the format, and that is the 4-color Omnath piles. And Izzet Murktide, do I think this card's likely to see a banning, at least in the format quite yet? No. If you would have said before the banning of Leyline Binding, maybe this is a card that you would consider knocking down the Murktide decks, as Murktide was kind of the de facto best deck in the format for probably 4 or 5 months at least. It was definitely by far the most played, and people have kind of moved off of it as Leyline Binding has kind of encouraged people to kind of experiment a little bit in the format. So, that said, these are all the cards that I would think would be under consideration for banning, and like I said, I don't expect to see a banning tomorrow, but these are certainly all the cards that you could see being banned. Now, I'm going to take a look at a couple of cards that could potentially open up the format a little bit differently, but we'll take a look at those here in 1 second. First card, this card has been sort of a fan favorite for a long time for a lot of people, and that is Splinter Twin. Now, Splinter Twin kind of operates on a different axis than the current Izzet decks in the format do. That's not to say that those decks can't incorporate things like Raghavan and Dragon Rage's Channeler and Expressive Iteration into a pile with Splinter Twin, but, that said, Splinter Twin itself would open up a little bit more of a flash game rather than more of these battle cruiser magic-esque things going in the format. Another reason to consider unbanning Splinter Twin at this point is the level of instant speed interaction has just continued to get better and better and better. Now, obviously, Pester Might, Deceiver Exarch, Restoration Angel, the main cards that you see played with something like this, could still get played in that style of strategy with something like Hiki-Jiki the Mirror Breaker. However, 5 mana, 4 mana, huge difference in terms of what you're capable of doing in the game. The downsides to this card is now things like Force of Negation and Teferi Time Raveler can make it a little bit more difficult to interact with this combo. But in terms of the combo that can be accurate, since Twin has gotten banned, a lot more instant speed interactions have been printed in the format. Things like Fatal Push with Revolt, things like Unholy Heat, things like Leyline Binding. You have all these much more readily available instant speed answers. And you could certainly consider unbanning this, although I don't think this would help the format all that much in terms of opening it up. There is one card I do think that could help some of the creature-based strategies. Obviously you have things like Yawgmoth and stuff, Hammer Time, etc. that still kind of perform well in the format, but there really isn't like a solid just creature mid-range or even creature combo deck in the format outside of Yawg, and there is one card that could kind of help open that up a little bit. And that card is Birthing Pod. Now, Birthing Pod was banned in a format where Siege Rhino was considered a playable Magic card. That tells you how long it's been. Siege Rhino was kind of the card that pushed it over the edge, just all these different value things, all these different combo things, and there have been some attempts to print some facsimile things like Vanafear into the format, but they just don't equate to the power of Birthing Pod and the power of Phyrexian Mana overall. Now, obviously, this one would be a little bit cautionary as far as unbanning, but I do think if there is an archetype or archetypes that could use a shot in the arm, would be the various creature-based decks in the format. And while you're still seeing a little bit of a resurgence of things like humans in the format, at least I've seen in the leagues that I've played a little bit lately, like this Azorius humans list popping up here and there. I do think creature decks as a whole could use a boost, and a card like Birthing Pod could certainly be a card that could help a few archetypes come back. Maybe you'd see something like Devoted Druid combo come back. Maybe you would see something like the Heliod combo come back. Maybe you'd see like kind of these Abzan or green-white mid-range-esque strategies built around these cards come back. So it was certainly a card that could be worth exploring and unbanning. Now, I don't think, once again, I really still stand by, I don't think there's going to be any changes to the Modern format tomorrow. But, if you wanted to open things up a little bit, Birthing Pod is certainly another card you could direction and go and help improve those decks a little bit. Maybe open up the format. And maybe even in conjunction with bannings and unbannings. If I were looking to improve the format overall, I think the two cards that I would hit would be Wrenn and 6 and Expressive Iteration, just because that would help worsen those mana bases just a tiny bit and knock down those Izzet decks a little bit. That might rise back up a little bit again if the 4 and 5 color piles kind of got knocked around a little bit. That said, I don't think the format needs any changes, but I do think that would be a good way to shake the format up a little bit. And maybe even just consider unbanning like Birthing Pod and see what happens from there. I do think it's kind of to a certain extent, it might be like a Bitter Blossom or Jace the Mind Sculptor, or even to a certain extent Stoneforge Mystic before Hammer Time kind of popped around, and that these decks just might, this card may just not see a lot of play. But, there is still that risk that it opens up the format a little bit too much and there's more creature-based combos. But, when you have all these Solitudes and Leyline of Bindings and all these spot removal spells and stuff, it's a little bit time to give the creature decks maybe something a little bit kind of balance out the format. So this is certainly a card you could do that with. As always, if you like these kind of videos, please consider subscribing to the channel, giving us a thumbs up, leaving a constructive comment down below, and hopefully come back tomorrow for our next deck guide. And then maybe there will be a ban announcement that we'll have to do for a reaction to that for Modern tomorrow. So, as always, thanks for tuning in. This has been John for MTG Nexus.